Greetings, curious minds. On this channel, we journey beyond the surface, seeking insight and understanding. Today, as always, we have many layers to explore. So, let's begin. In the annals of American history, some moments stand as stark reminders of the cost of war, both on the battlefield and on the home front. These are the stories of sacrifice, courage, and sometimes profound tragedy. Among them is a chapter often overlooked, yet one that reverberates with immense power. A colossal explosion, not of a bomb dropped by an enemy, but of one that erupted from within. This is the story of the Port Chicago disaster, a catastrophe that unfolded in the year 1944 during the height of World War II. Our journey takes us to the tranquil shores of Suisun Bay in California, to the Port Chicago Naval Magazine, northeast of San Francisco. In that era, this was a vital artery for the war effort, a bustling hub where munitions were loaded onto cargo ships bound for the Pacific Theater. Day and night, hundreds of men toiled, preparing the tools of war that would determine the fate of nations. The setting was idyllic, but the work was anything but. Under immense pressure to supply the war effort, ships were loaded with a speed that often defied safety. Ammunition, shells, bombs, depth charges, TNT, was moved by hand, hoisted by cranes, and stacked with precarious haste. It was a dangerous business, made more perilous by a system of deeply ingrained discrimination. The vast majority of the men assigned to this perilous duty were African American enlisted personnel, often segregated into non-combat roles, and with little to no formal training in handling explosives. They were not volunteers for this specific task. It was simply where they were assigned. They worked long shifts, often around the clock, under the watchful eyes of white officers who pushed for speed above all else, frequently betting on which crew could load a ship fastest. These young men, many barely out of their teens, found themselves on the front lines of a different kind of battle, one against time, exhaustion, and systemic racial inequality. By the evening of July 17, 1944, the atmosphere at Port Chicago was charged with this relentless urgency. Two cargo ships, the SS E.A. Bryan and the SS Quinault, lay moored at Pier 1, being loaded simultaneously. The E.A. Bryan was already nearly full, carrying thousands of tons of ammunition. The Quinault was also receiving its dangerous cargo. The exact cause of what happened next remains debated, shrouded in the chaos of that night. Some suggest a dropped munition, a sparking crane, a careless act under duress. But the underlying cause, undeniably, was the unsafe and discriminatory working conditions, the breakneck pace, and the systemic disregard for the lives of the men performing this vital yet deadly work. At 10:18 p.m., the night air was suddenly torn apart. Without warning, a searing flash illuminated the bay, followed milliseconds later by an unimaginable roar. The E.A. Bryan exploded first, a cataclysmic detonation that instantly vaporized the ship and its contents. Before the sound could fully register, the explosion triggered the ammunition on the nearby Quinault, creating a second, equally devastating blast. The explosive material was tens of thousands of tons of bombs, shells, depth charges, and other munitions. The estimated yield of this horrific event was equivalent to between 2 and 3 kilotons of TNT, an energy release so vast it was one of the largest man-made conventional explosions before the advent of nuclear weapons. The immediate impact was apocalyptic. Both ships were utterly obliterated, their remnants raining down as shrapnel for miles. The pier itself vanished. A massive fireball erupted, rising thousands of feet into the night sky, followed by a shockwave that rippled outwards with terrifying force. Buildings as far as 50 miles away were damaged, windows shattered in San Francisco, and the blast was felt throughout much of California. Seismographs registered the explosion as a significant earthquake. The casualties were staggering. In an instant, 320 souls perished. They were vaporized, disintegrated, or flung far from the blast site. Of those lost, an overwhelming 202 were African American enlisted men, along with 63 white officers and enlisted men and 55 civilian workers. Another 390 people were injured, many severely by the blast, falling debris, and the sheer force of the explosion. The Port Chicago disaster became the deadliest home-front disaster of World War II, a chilling testament to the unseen dangers faced by those supporting the war from afar. Yet, the tragedy did not end with the explosion itself. In the grim aftermath, the surviving African American servicemen were ordered back to work to clear the wreckage and continue loading ships at another pier. Many were still reeling from the horror, suffering from shock and grief, and acutely aware that the conditions that led to the blast had not changed. A deep sense of injustice, fear, and profound weariness festered. On August 9th, just weeks after the explosion, 258 men refused to resume loading ammunition, citing safety concerns and their sheer terror. Their refusal was not mutiny in the traditional sense, but a desperate cry for safety and dignity. They were ordered to load or face court-martial. 50 men held firm. They were charged with mutiny. The ensuing court-martial was a landmark event, though largely overshadowed by the war. It became a powerful crucible, exposing the systemic racial segregation and discrimination within the U.S. military. Thurgood Marshall, then chief counsel for the NAACP, attended portions of the trial, arguing passionately that the men were being prosecuted not for insubordination, but for their race and for their courage in refusing to endanger their lives under unjust conditions. Despite the compelling arguments, the 50 men were convicted of mutiny and sentenced to up to 15 years in prison. The convictions were later largely overturned or commuted, and ultimately, in 1999, President Bill Clinton issued a pardon to the last living defendant, Freddie Meeks. Yet, the scar of those wrongful convictions remained. The overall impact of the Port Chicago disaster extended far beyond the immediate devastation. It galvanized the nascent civil rights movement, drawing national attention to the deep-seated racial prejudices within the military. It highlighted the unconscionable practice of assigning black servicemen to the most dangerous duties, often without adequate training. Ultimately, the pressure generated by this tragedy and its aftermath played a significant role in President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which officially desegregated the U.S. Armed Forces. The sacrifices of the men of Port Chicago, both those who died and those who stood firm against injustice, became a poignant, if painful, catalyst for change. The Port Chicago disaster was more than just an explosion. It was a crucible. It was a moment of immense tragedy, a testament to human courage in the face of fear, and a stark mirror reflecting the deeply ingrained inequalities of its time. It is a silent chapter in the history of a nation at war, yet one that speaks volumes about the fight for justice, the enduring power of empathy, and the profound, often hidden human cost of conflict.